1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4。We hit check 1 2 T T T T T T T 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 check 1 2 check 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4試咪1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 check 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1係咪全程都用晒依部㗎啦？嗬，唔會又要 slack 過去㗎嗬。1 2 3 4 1 check 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4喂，一廠嘅同事清唔清楚？我想請問。1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1好啊，check 1 2 2 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2清唔清楚㗎 ？Sky 嗰邊嚇？非常好，OK 啊，好，音樂都 OK 啊。 嘿嘿。
MC 嚟個橙色俾阿嘉賓啦，佢揾嘢洗醒㗎嘛，橙色俾嘉賓，藍色俾咩咯？唔係粉紅色俾 MC 好冇？
喂 testing。
喂，同事有少少改變啊！原本預粉紅色嗰支呢，因為嘉賓呢，佢自己就會喺個台上面自己講嘅啫，就唔會再有同老師啊或者其他人對話嘅。咁佢自己講 solo 啦。咁跟住去到 Q&A 就有兩支預備 Q&A，咁阿恒到時再派咪咯。咁依支做嘉賓好唔好啊？我放喺度咯噃。 MC 你 O 唔 OK 啊？如果不如試下支咪啊，等我哋同事吞一吞啲聲啦，好冇？
Testing, testing. Professors, distinguished guests, my fellow students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the first college assembly in the Year of Monkey. It is a privilege that today's talk will be given by Professor John Minford, which marks the beginning of Professor Minford's Culture and Translation series at Hansa Management College. The assembly will also be live broadcast in several classrooms this afternoon. Before the assembly commences, please make sure that your mobile phone remains silent during the talk. Thank you for your kind cooperation. Now we would like to invite Professor Gilbert Fong, Provost and Dean of School of Translation, to introduce Professor Minford. Professor Fong, please.
Yeah, yeah, sure, okay. You haven't got a mic you could clip onto my jacket. No, not good enough. Not very, okay. All right, I'll use that one. Hello, hello, hello. Is that all right? Is that coming over clearly? Testing, testing. Shall I sing a song? No, I don't think so. That's all right. Okay, good.
陣間係全程都用呢部㗎嘛。抽用翻方先。你點叫啊？Minford點叫？Professor Minford。我係應該擠出嚟啫。喂 testing。Maybe this one, yes, this one, yes, 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 it's okay. 12係咪 full screen 嚟？Okay.
Looks like me at all. It looks like somebody else. I think it doesn't really look like me.
I think it's
有一点不像
it's
我。
not like you.
不像我。
No.
一点也不像。
This size is very low. Can you try to the mic first?
Yes, okay. I tried it just now and it was fine. And I think it's still fine. And I can sing a song, but not today. Tomorrow, perhaps.
Okay, thank you.
I can do my Elvis Presley imitation.
No, thank you. Yes, the PowerPoint presenter is coming. I think about 5 to 10 minutes. Yes, you can use the PowerPoint presenter there. You can walk here and there. Yes. Yes. 可以，揾出嚟咯。
You know how to control this one? Yeah, okay. Okay.
希望唔使成日喐。或者可以再近少少。
因為收唔到你講緊嘢㗎。
收唔到。哇！如果唔係啲記者好慘。場嗰啲人好慘。係咯，收住佢。
我嘅歌啊嘛，好大啊，咁都冇得睇。
係。除非你咁樣一路跟住。
有咩細啲啊？
放鬆下。冇出到去。係咪喺邊度？
後面呢3行都可以坐嘅。
真係會頭。
可以坐咗後面呢3行先咯。
佢要我哋坐後面先。係啊，會頭。
坐得坐遠。
我要幫我抄實啊。
3行而家變咗3行，可以。
點解你喺度嘅？你做 helper 嘅？
呢度唔得，我哋講起實聽到啊呢度。
收俾我買嘢咪。你哋使唔使一齊坐？
啊唔使啦，唔使。
盡量就唔好留位置啦，除非你真係有 friend 你要留俾佢。如果人 group 嘅咧，你都照坐埋嗰度，因為今日人數會比較多一啲，盡量唔好留位啦。Sorry。
佢哋點解有肉頭嘅呢樣先啦？
唔好留空位啊嘛。
條路咧都係學校。 拎唔咗。你想而家？而家咯。
最後嗰行就唔係要。有啊，佢上我即係已經可能。
我頭先都會話係錄下啲坐位啲情佢呢部機好光喎，所以部機教到好紅，較高啲啊！係啊係。係喎，你知唔知發光佢都望唔到你啊嘛？而家望到你，係啊，而家可以坐呢邊喎，後面嗰3行中間圍咗嚟，前面就你可以坐後，呢3行有啲位置都可以坐嘅。
果你即係有朋友留名位俾佢咧，就唔好特別留空一個位置啦。哇！即係如果你隔離你冇留俾朋友嘅，就唔好特登留空一個位，咁變咗可以同我哋可以。咪住，即係可能啲事，佢就係呢樣。食咗，齋食咯，但係溝唔到，少咗。喂！我同你開我聽唔聽咧？係啊，你有冇聽到咧？因為我仲聽到我收集聲。係啊。係有。聲唔係啲聲嚟啊！佢應該係出邊支咪嚟。係啊係。嚟幫我宣傳。你一係坐去嗰邊。我話嗰部機都錄屏幕嘅。佢哋，喂！對，做自己有沒有人咬？但我有人咬。呢啲。
呢度呢個咪喎。喂喂喂喂喂喂！麻煩坐過嚟呢邊啦，咁我哋要拍嘢。死我！因為淨係自己食。Testing, testing. Testing. 其實咧，一係將3.5轉3.5直接過落去。聽唔到，聽唔到。即係如果你呢個咧有咗條3.5。喂，有冇啊 Tommy 電話？DJ 先 Tommy，DJ 先 Tommy。好啦，拜。出咩事？邊度啊張卡牌？我呢張係 spare。揸住邊度咧？唔通係嚿嘢鬆咗
？So you'll be sitting here and talk, right? Okay. You walk around. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, all right, okay. That's right.
Professors, distinguished guests, my fellow students, Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the first College Assembly in the Year of Monkey. It is our privilege that today's talk will be given by Professor John Minford, which marks the beginning of Professor Minford's Culture and Translation series at Hansa Management College. The assembly will also be live broadcast in several classrooms this afternoon. Before the assembly commences, please make sure that your mobile phone remains silent during the talk. Thank you for your kind cooperation. Now, we would like to invite Professor Gilbert Fong, Provost and Dean of School of Translation, to introduce Professor Minford. Professor Fong, please.
Thank you. I gotta take a look at my cap paper here before I do anything. That's Mao Ji, if you missed the word here. President, Professor Minford, honored guests, colleagues, and students. Professor Minford is no stranger to HSMC, and HSMC is no stranger to Professor Minford. He has been a member of the advisory board of the School of Translation for many, many years. In fact, even before the translation program was launched, when it was in its embryonic phase, Professor Minford graciously lent us a helping hand and played an important part in shaping the present translation program. Is that right? Yeah, thank you. Right. He actually was the writer, or ghost writer, of many of our modules that our students are studying today. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is one person in the world of Chinese English literary translation who needs no introduction at all, it is Professor John Minford. However, I will still attempt this rather superfluous task for the sake of courtesy and for the sake of those of you and those of us who are unenlightened. Professor Minford graduated from Winchester College and Balliol College of Oxford University with a degree in Chinese studies. Over the subsequent 15 years, he worked closely with Professor David Hawkes on the translation of the Story of the Stone, which is Sek Tao Gei, which is also known as Hong Lao Meng, the Dream of the Red Chamber. And the rest, as they say, was history. Here, I would just enumerate a few of the books, of the famous books that we are very familiar with, that Professor Minford had translated. Besides the Story of the Stone, Hong Lao Meng, there's a translation of Kim Yong's Luk Ting Gei, translated as The Deer and the Cauldron, and that was in 1997. And then Xun Ji Bing Fa, The Art of War, and then Po Chongling's Liu Zai Ji Yi. He translated it as The Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. And recently, in 2014, he also published his translation of the Yi Jing, the Book of Changes, Yi King. And there's one book that's forthcoming, I think, I'm not mistaken. It's called The Tao and the Power, Lao Zi, Tao De Jing, Dou De King. So you could see that, he's a very versatile translator. As a matter of fact, he also translated some of the modern writers as well. Is that right? And I also know that he's also a playwright. Am I wrong or not? I haven't seen any of your plays being performed. Perhaps you could do some today. Right. So we are very, very honored today because he's a world-renowned sinologist and translator. And he served in many institutions, including being the Dean of the School of Arts and Social Sciences of the Open U. And then afterwards, he also ran to, right? at the same time, running to Provence, the south of France, and trying, I was told, to grow grapes to make his own wine for some years, right? And I guess he was very happy. I don't know about the wine, haven't tasted it. So anyway, that has nothing to do with academics. So he was acting dean at the Open University, and then he came back to Hong Kong. He was the chair professor of the Department of Translation, the Chinese University. And then he went to, and also ran to Australia, became the chair professor of Chinese at the ANU, Australian National University. And there are many, many honors bestowed on Professor Minford. I'm not going to name them all because it would take a long, long time for me to do it. I just hope that he will feel equally as honored to receive the title of the Xin Weigin Honorary Professor of Chinese Culture and Translation here at HSMC. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fong. Now, Professor Ho, President of Hansang Management College, represent the certificate of Xin Weigin Honorary Professor of Chinese Culture and Translation to Professor John Minford. Professor Ho and Professor Minford, please. Without further ado, let's begin the talk by welcoming Professor Minford again.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by expressing my great gratitude to my friend Gilbert Fong and to the president of this college and to the foundation which has so generously supported my visit. It is really an enormous pleasure for me to come back here and to have an opportunity to talk about my favorite subject. I've just recently retired from the university in Canberra, the Australian National University, and I'm enjoying my retirement enormously, especially because I'm busier than ever. And I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy talking, as I'm sure some of my former students and friends who are here know that almost nothing will stop me from talking. So I'm enormously honored to be here. I have a great affection for this place. I came here, as Gilbert said, I came here when they were in the planning stages of their translation program. And I really admired the kind of enthusiasm, the spirit of a new institution with fresh ideas, with no sort of handicaps handed down from history, and with all sorts of very fine ideals. And I still feel like that about this place. So I'm very happy to be here. And everybody's been looking after me so nicely, and so far I've only been here 2 or 3 days, but I've already enjoyed my stay enormously, even though I flew over from the summer in New Zealand, where it was very beautiful weather, to rather a chilly, late winter's period. However, it's just such a great pleasure to be here. Hong Kong is really my second home, as I've said to various friends today. I've lived and taught here for over 15 years. I think I've taught in 4 different institutions, and all of my children went to school here. And I first came here as a young student in 1966. That's 50 years ago, before none of you were even a twinkle in your grandparents. I mean, your parents probably weren't even born into the, you know. So I'm a really old timer, you know. And I remember Hong Kong in 1966, when it was just a sleepy little place, you know. I drove out to the New Territories, and Sha Tin was a small fishing village, you know. There was nothing here. It was very, very quiet. Very nice, I have to say. Of course, now the population of Hong Kong is twice the population of New Zealand. And, you know, it's an extraordinarily vibrant and exciting place. I always am amazed when I come back to Hong Kong. Within a matter of minutes, I pick up this incredible high energy of this place. There's nowhere quite like it in the world. I have a very, very deep affection for this city. I wish especially to thank the Sin Wai Kin Foundation for making this possible, because I think they have very honorable ideals to promote Chinese culture. I mean, that's basically what I've spent my life doing. I've had a lot of fun doing it, so I'm not saying I've been a slave, but it is a very noble ideal, and I do thank them very much. I've prepared an awful lot of material and stuff, and I always do. I always prepare much too much material. I'm a great over-preparer, and then I usually forget about it all and just talk off the top of my head. In fact, I was speaking to a friend of mine in Australia earlier on this afternoon, and he said, "John, don't worry, you won't do anything connected to the notes or the PowerPoint. You'll just tell stories, because that's what you do. You're just a storyteller." And I'll try not to do that, because I think I owe you something a little more organized. Now, the first thing I want to say is, please, if I'm speaking too fast, will some brave person put their hand up? Normally I nominate somebody, you know, but I won't embarrass any of my former students today by nominating them, will I, Tianru? No. So I mean, but please, am I making myself clearly understood? Yes? Okay, I'm getting a nod. Gilbert, am I speaking clear enough? Okay. So I'll try and slow down, because I know I tend to get faster and faster. I've also got to keep well away from the edge of the platform, otherwise I'll fall over, and then there won't be a talk at all. I shall just be rushed off to hospital. I know exactly what I want to say. I mean, I do have a message. I'm not going to preach a sermon or anything, but I do have a message. And you know, I've in my long career, I've supervised and examined a large number of graduate students doing PhDs and things like that. And you know, when I get to the examination, I only have one question really to ask them, which is, do you have a message? Do you have something to say? You know, I know it's important to write the thesis properly and be a scholar or whatever that means, but what I'm really concerned about with all of my students is to encourage them to find out what it is they have to say and to enable them to say it. And that, for me, is what a lot of teaching is about. And I've spent my life as a translator and as a teacher, as a mixture of the two. And so I really have a very strong view about, is that Simon over there? Hello, Simon. How very sweet of you to come. How very embarrassing, but very sweet. I thought I recognized you. Sorry, I've just seen an old friend of mine. I'm overcome with emotion, but I'm also going to control my emotion, because that's what I have to do. I'm sitting on the stage, I'm standing up here. So yes, the message. And they call it in academic lingo, they call it a thesis. You know, you've got to have something to say. And I do have something to say, which I feel very passionately about, and that is about the nature of translation and how one should teach it and how one should train translators. It's something that's been on my mind for a very long time. And now, as I finally retired from my position as a professor, I can actually afford to have some ideas of my own and not to be at the mercy of the academic management, you know, who are always wanting output rather than ideas. So I can now afford the luxury of having ideas and just spending all my time thinking about them. And I do think about them a great deal, because I look around me at different universities where I've taught, and I just feel that they really have got it so wrong, so deeply wrong. And so I'm actually planning, I'm going to spill the beans now, I'm actually planning to set up a private academy of my own, which I think is the kind of eccentric, mad thing that old professors are supposed to do when they retire. Well, I'm sorry to be so predictable, but that's what I'm going to do, because I want to prove that my ideas work. And anyway, I've given the whole game away. The rest is just more of the same. Anyway, I have prepared a PowerPoint. I don't really believe in PowerPoints. They're just pictures. I shall ignore them mainly, but just talk around them. And I don't like this microphone because it's rather heavy, but I will have to speak into it because apparently otherwise they can't record the sound. The topic of this series of talks that I'm giving, and I want to call them talks, not lectures. You know, some of the best things in all of Chinese literature are what they call poetry talks, 实话 or 词话, or, you know, 曲话. And there's a deliberately modest way of describing some of the great works of Chinese literary criticism to call them just chats, you know, talks. What I'm giving are really, you know, what I would call 议话, just talks about translation. And the main theme, well, there are two themes that really are interconnected. The main themes are the relationship between culture and literature and translation, and then the way in which that really should drive the training of translators and the practice of translation. So I hope I can get this thing to work. It's rather advanced for me. Oh yes, there we go, yeah. So I'm going to begin in a rather strange manner. I'm going to begin by looking at a most wonderful poem which I once learnt at school when I was about 13 years old. I went to a very, very old-fashioned school, and every week we had to learn poetry by heart, and we had to recite it in front of our fellow students. And also at my school, I also learnt to enjoy translating because that's what we did every week. And that was how we learnt. We translated. And it was a very good way of learning, and I do believe still today that translation, if properly taught, is one of the best trainings for the mind that exists, because it's very, very demanding, it's very problem-solving, and it encourages both analysis and synthesis. So I think that I like the way that in this college, translation has from the very beginning been one of the core subjects, because it reaches out across all kinds of different areas of study, including, of course, business. And you know, translating for business is a very hard thing to do. I have a very good friend who's a business translator, and I know the demands made upon that person's time. So I'm going to begin by looking at this poem by John Keats, who is my favorite poet in any language. I say that, you know, I know that you're all going to tell me, what about Li Bai and Du Fu? But I mean, John Keats, the guy lived for 20-something years. I mean, he died in extreme youth in terrible circumstances in Rome. But in that very short life, you know, like Mozart, or like, you know, Mozart lived longer than him, of course. He just wrote the most superb poetry. And this particular poem is entitled On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. It's very, very famous. And we all had to learn it at school. Now, of course, our teachers never really told us what the poem was about, because that wasn't their job. We just had to learn it by heart. And that was about as much as we were told to do. And I, of course, thought that Chapman was probably one of Keats's friends, and he'd lent him his copy of Homer, you see. And I thought poor old Keats went home with his friend's copy of Homer and wrote it all down. And that's how stupid I was. And in fact, you see, the truth of the matter is that this is a poem about translation, because George Chapman was a great poet, but also a translator, and he translated the whole of Homer's two great epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, into some very remarkable English poetry. And what happened was that Keats was visiting his friend, and his friend lent him his personal copy of the Chapman translation of this poem. And Keats went home, and the next morning he just dashed off a sonnet, an absolutely perfect sonnet, on the subject of reading a translation. So this is one of the great poems about translation, and it really says everything that there is to be said about the nature of translation. So I'm going to just read it to you first of all. That's a picture of Keats, which you can enjoy looking at while I read the poem. It's on your handout, or I hope it is. I think it should be on the second page. Yes, if you turn to the second page, I think I have to read it aloud because it's such a joy. And this is how the poem goes. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. Every time I read that poem, I'm absolutely knocked out by it, because it's so perfect. He was one of these geniuses. I mean, he was able to rhyme completely effortlessly, and he was able to write a technically perfect sonnet without even, making the slightest effort. It's the most wonderful poem. But what really interests me today is to try and convey to you not just that it's a beautiful poem, but that it's a poem that's rich in what I call cultural resonance, and that anyone wishing to translate this poem into Chinese, and there are several quite good translations, including one by the great Mu Dan of this poem, and has to understand the cultural resonance of this poem. And I want to talk very briefly about some of these cultural references in the poem, because what I really want to convince you all of today, and I'm speaking, of course, to the students, is that there is no shortcut. Translation is a lifelong pursuit. I've been doing it for 50 years, and I'm still studying myself all the time. And that what you have to do is you have to be eternally patient. You know, the great painter, the great Italian painter, Leonardo da Vinci, was once asked to define genius. What is genius? Somebody said. It's a bit like Pilate asking what is truth. Someone said to Leonardo da Vinci, what is genius? Does anybody know what his answer was? I didn't know until a few months ago when my friend told me. His answer was eternal patience. Eternal patience. That from one of the great, true geniuses of human history. And I think with translation, I'm not talking about being a genius, but there is no shortcut. You just have to go on and on and on, exploring and imbibing the culture, the language, the literature, the entire ambiance of whatever language it is you're translating from. And you need to wake up every morning with the understanding that you know nothing, that you still have a huge amount to learn. And only when you reach that point are you ready to even begin to translate. And so let's look at this poem a little bit. First of all, you see, it announces right from the beginning, from the very title, that it's a poem about Homer. Homer, Homer. I mean, Homer is one of the great fathers of Western poetry, and his two long epic poems. In fact, Homer probably wasn't one person at all, probably a group of people, and there seems to be a tradition that most of them were blind, and they were storytellers who made up stories using formulaic expressions and so on. There's been a lot of scholarship about Homer. But I'm not really interested in the modern scholarship. I'm interested in Homer as a presence in Western culture for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you see, if you don't have the time to absorb that, you will never really make any progress. I mean, if you want to become a translator of English, of any kind really, even of modern political writing, for example, you have to be prepared to commit yourself to a lifelong study of English-speaking culture, and you have to be prepared to be eternally patient about it, because there is no shortcut. And I've just put together a few pictures to sort of give you an idea of how the Homeric, as they call it, the Homeric tradition lies at the root of so much in Western culture, not just English, of course, French, German, Italian, Spanish, you name it. And here are some, this of course is Keats, and this is the great movie that was made about Keats, with Bright Star. I just show that to try and liven things up a bit, there's another rather gloomy picture of poor old Keats. He did have a rather wretched time. And so here's Homer. Here's a typical, cliched sculpture of Homer, mainly trying to depict the fact that he was blind, or he or they or whatever Homer was. See, no, I'm not really interested in Homer the person. I'm just interested in these two wonderful long poems, the one about the Trojan War and the other about Odysseus and his travels, the Odyssey. You really can't understand most of Western literature until you've read Homer. And unfortunately, and I say this with great regret, there is really no satisfactory Chinese translation of Homer today. Yang Xianyi, for whom I have an enormous respect and who is a great friend and mentor of mine, he did translate Homer, but he wasn't the right person, really. I mean, he made a good shot at it, but Homer is still waiting for somebody who will dedicate their life to translating Homer, somebody who will commit for 20 or 30 years, a bit like our friend Huang Guobin committed himself to translate Dante's Divine Comedy, and he spent 20 years doing it, and he had to perfect his Italian, and he had to devise a rhyming scheme that fitted in with Dante's. Somebody's got to do that with Homer, and I think it will be a wonderful day when they do, but up till now they haven't. This is George Chapman. This is the translator who was a contemporary of William Shakespeare and wrote a really rollicking translation of Homer, which, and he looks like a kind of interesting person too. Obviously spent a lot of time trimming his beard by the look of it. And this is the title page of his. You see what beautiful title pages they had in those days. This is his Homer. You see Chapman. You'll see in small letters there. Now, throughout the history of Western culture, everybody has got something to say about Homer. This was the great Raphael, and he was depicting all these famous men of letters on Mount Parnassus, and he had to have Homer. And of course, Homer had to be blind, and there he is. And this is a Victorian painting. I mean, the Victorians couldn't leave Homer alone, and they had to have, look at this wonderful reading. This guy's reading to these sort of young people in all their interesting costumes, and that lady's reclining on the sofa. I mean, this is a Victorian vision of Homer, you know. This is another Victorian vision of Homer. This time there's a dog in the picture. You know, I don't suppose Homer had a dog at all, but he's being led by a young man because he's blind. So Homer pops up all over the place, you know. This is Salvador Dali, the great surrealist painter. He had a go at Homer as well. I won't pause on this one, but there's all things melting, and, you know, Homer is kind of everywhere and nowhere. And here's Homer, the rhapsodist, with his lyre, you know. And here's Homer Simpson, you see. I mean, you can't even understand The Simpsons unless you know something about Homer. Why was he called Homer, you know? There's a whole deep structure of, and of course, this is what we would call lowbrow culture, but you've got to be prepared to take in lowbrow culture as well. Otherwise, you know, you'll miss all kinds of references, you know. And then there's the whole background of Greek art and Greek history. You just can't afford to take shortcuts. You've got to be willing to say, oh my God, I don't know enough about Greece. I don't know enough about Athens. I don't know enough about Socrates. I don't know enough about Plato or Sappho. You know, they say that Sappho was the first lesbian poet, but recently the research seems to prove that the only thing that was lesbian about Sappho was she lived on the island of Lesbos, and that she was actually not lesbian at all. So, you know, the culture of Greece is eternally alive in Western culture. It cannot be ignored. Another popular painting showing Achilles, the great hero of the Trojan War, dragging the unfortunate Hector behind his chariot round the walls of Troy. You know, and recently, of course, there was the famous movie with Brad Pitt. So, I mean, Homer and Achilles, they just don't go away. And here are some Greek warriors on a vase. And then there's the Odyssey, which is the other great poem. And this, of course, I couldn't resist putting this one in because this is the famous scene where the sirens, and of course, in this painting, they're not wearing very many clothes. And they're trying to seduce poor old Odysseus. And the sailors have tied him to the mast of the ship. And everything about the Odyssey is kind of symbolic, which is why when James Joyce came to write his great novel Ulysses, he had the entire myth, the whole symbolism of Odysseus in the back of his mind. And almost almost the whole of modern English literature is kind of the shadow of Odysseus hangs over it. He's one of those eternal symbols. And this is Yang Xianyu, who did translate Homer, but even he himself admits it wasn't his best work, because he wasn't a poet. You've got to be able to sing, you know. You've got to be able to produce Chinese that sings like a ballad. And there would have been people, there probably still will be people who will do it. And it'll be a great day when they do. Now, another reference in this poem, you see, the poem says, John Keats's poem says, when I read this translation, it was like a whole new world opening up before me. You know, I've read lots of other stuff, all these, you know, the golden, I mean, the realms of gold. He says he's traveled in the realms of gold. That means he's read a lot of poetry. But then suddenly he discovered this translation of Homer, and it was like somebody opened a whole door into another new world. And he compares it. He uses two brilliant images to describe that experience, which is the experience of reading a translation of a new work. Don't forget, it's about translation. And he says one of them was about, it was like discovering a new planet. Well, you see, just a little while before he wrote this poem, this man Herschel had discovered the first new planet to be discovered for hundreds and hundreds of years, which was the planet Uranus. And there's the telescope that he used. That's supposed to be Herschel discovering it. So this image was very contemporary, very current. And it's a very powerful image that Keats uses to illustrate what reading a translation was like for him. It was like discovering a new planet, you know. And the other image that he uses is of the Spanish explorer Cortes discovering the Pacific Ocean. Well, actually, he was quite wrong. It wasn't Cortes. It was somebody else. But who cares about that? I mean, that's a mere fact. We don't need to be upset about that. What he's saying is that the experience of discovering new literature through translation was just the same as the first explorers who crossed over Central America and suddenly saw another ocean, even bigger than the Atlantic. They never even knew about it before, and suddenly there it was, a new world, a whole new world, a brave new world. And that was all made possible by translation. And there's the rather beautifully dressed Mr. Cortes, one of the conquistadors, they're called, one of the great Spanish. Nowadays, you can't say much good about them because they did terrible things, of course. But in their day, they were heroes, you know, a bit like Achilles. And this is the age of Cortes. I mean, this is the age of exploration. And if you look at this map, it's kind of, it puts you in a particular place, a particular moment in history when the world was suddenly becoming a bigger place and people were exploring all, you know, America, Asia, India. They didn't find Australia, luckily for the Australians, I mean the indigenous Australians. And this time of exploration was also one of the great periods of translation. The two go hand in hand. All right, well, we'll move on from Keats's wonderful poem, but slightly broaden our sphere and to talk about the roots of Western culture, because, you know, once you mention Homer, there's, of course, all the other stuff as well, and the name that immediately leaps to mind is the most wonderful figure in the history of Western thought, in my humble opinion, and that's the great Socrates. You know, Socrates, who was condemned to death for corrupting the young. I hope I won't be taken away and given hemlock later on, Gilbert. But anyway, I'm not trying to corrupt the young. I'm just trying to say some things that I think are interesting. But then so was Socrates, you see, and he was put to death. And he was the most extraordinarily inspiring person. I've recently, and this I suppose is what I'm trying to say to you, I've recently been rereading Socrates. I had to read Plato, you know, the Socratic dialogues. I had to read those as a young student. And it was an unforgettable experience. And now, as I enter my retirement, I'm finding myself drawn back to Socrates. I was reading it last night. It's so moving. This was a man of true integrity. He really had something very deep that he wanted to tell other people about. And he was not going to compromise himself. He would rather die than do that. He was the most inspiring person, a great, great figure. And if you think that's just my opinion, I think I've got the next slide. This is someone I'm sure you all know in any business school, you know, Steve Jobs. Not a nice person, I'm afraid, but a very, very successful entrepreneur. And he was quoted as saying, I would trade all of my technology for an afternoon with Socrates. And there you go, that's Steve Jobs. If you don't believe me, you'll probably have to believe him. Again, like Homer, Socrates has been part of Western culture throughout, the last 2,000 years. And in recent times, people can't resist doing paintings. Here he is with a disciple, and the disciple is not enough to make the painting interesting, so they introduce a young lady. And here he is on his deathbed, about to take the poison, the hemlock that will kill him, surrounded by his disciples. This is another painting. It's one of the favorite subjects for painters. And this is a great portrait of Plato, who, of course, is the person who wrote the most about Socrates, by the great painter Raphael. Now, as a slight detour, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that if it were not for Arabic scholarship in the Middle Ages, we would simply not have Socrates and Plato. It was the Arabic scholars who translated some of these early Greek thinkers into Arabic, and their Arabic translations then prompted the whole revival of ancient Greek learning during the Renaissance. So yet again, translation played a key role in the whole life of Western culture. And at that time, because the Arabs had already invaded Spain, they set up important translation centers in cities like Toledo and also in Baghdad. These were centers of translation, because at that time, the Muslim world, the Islamic world, was very open and very, very learned. Some of the finest and oldest universities in the world were actually in places like Morocco. And there were some very fine translators working out of Greek and Latin into Arabic. And this is a gentleman that I'm going to come across later. He's called Benjamin Jowett. And he went to my college at Oxford, Balliol College, and he was a great translator of Greek, of Plato. In fact, his translations of Plato are still being printed today, and they read very, very well. And I want to mention him especially because he was very influential on one of the 4 Chinese scholars I shall be talking about in the weeks to come. But before him, and this is where I'm going to pause for one moment, well, to have a drink of water actually, but if you look on page 2 of your handout, you'll see that I have a heading there called The Lineages of Translation. Now, what's a lineage? A lineage is, of course, it's a line of transmission. If I'm Mr. Smith's student and Mr. Smith was a student of somebody else, that's a kind of lineage. Things get handed down from one teacher to another student, who then becomes a teacher of another student, and so on. And that's a lineage. And in the world of translation of Chinese, which is what I'm talking about really, the first lineage was the lineage of the Jesuits. Now, some of you may not know who the Jesuits were. They're an order within the Roman Catholic Church, but they're the most intellectual of all the Roman Catholic orders of monks, and very, very brilliant thinkers. And they were the first people to really translate Chinese literature into a Western language. Of course, they translated into Latin, because Latin was the language used by all of the scholars in Europe as a common language, what they called a lingua franca of Europe. And their translations were very, very influential in the Europe of the 18th century, the so-called period of the Enlightenment. And as a result of many of these translations, China's influence was enormous during that time. And this is a picture from one of those early Jesuit books showing 2 Jesuit fathers holding up a map of China, you see. There's China. Well, I can use this funny gadget, sorry. It'll be fun, I've never used one of these before. There we are, there we are. There's a Jesuit father, you see, and there's another one. And they've got this map, which is very conveniently being held up by an angel, right? And up here, of course, is the light of God, of Jesus. And here are some more early